me as a North American to join with this distinguished group of Latin Americans to launch the report that they have prepared, which I was honored to sign on to, and I think is really a first-rate effort at analysis. I would make three observations. First, there is a deep puzzle here. If you had asked me when I had worked very closely with Guillermo as the finance minister of Mexico, and in 1997, Mexico had paid back all of the emergency loans that the United States had provided after the tequila crisis. If you had asked me, would I be pleased if no other Mexican election period was marked by financial crisis after 5 in a row had been between 1976 and 1994? Would I be pleased if Mexican inflation had stayed as low as it had? Would I be pleased if Mexico's credit spread was frequently under 200 basis points? Would I be pleased if trade between Mexico and the United States under NAFTA increased as much as it had? I would have answered that I would be thrilled and that I would regard it as an extremely good outcome. And yet, if you had asked me, what would I think about the GDP growth experience Mexico has had over the subsequent 26 years? What would I think about the growth in real wages that Mexico has had for 26 years? I think I would have been quite disappointed that Mexico had not done better. And so in many ways, Mexico's story, and I think the story of many other parts of Latin America, is a story of macroeconomic virtue not fully rewarded, or even macroeconomic virtue unrewarded. And I think that is a large challenge for economic policy, and it is a challenge for economic policymakers. It teaches, I think, that the concerns of people like the people on this call with matters financial and central banking are necessary for success, but that they are not sufficient for success. That, as I've often said, no matter how the misguided monetary and fiscal policies can do almost infinite damage to any economy, but no matter how brilliantly twiddled the dials of fiscal and monetary policy are not sufficient to bring a country prosperity and rapid growth, which depends upon the skill of its workers, the creativity and drive of its businesses, and above all, the quality of its institutions. And it is these matters that I think loom critical in the years ahead for success in much of Latin America. And I think this report is coming particularly from a group of macroeconomically oriented people is very important in pointing to those factors. And I think the great challenge for economic policy in Latin America, and indeed in many places, is moving beyond macroeconomic virtue, which is right, and the condemnation of populism, which is also right, to fostering a synthesis that is sufficient to generate continuing prosperity. That brings me to my second observation. An important theme that I used to talk about as a Treasury official in the 1990s was convergence within the Americas. And I used to speak about the importance of democracy by the people also being effective democracy for the people. I confess that at that time, I had principally in mind the convergence of the Southern Americas towards North America. I envisioned convergence in GDP figures, convergence in reductions in inequality in Latin America, the movement towards a more long-term and less populist approach to government, movements towards a more open and internationalist approach to trade, reductions in the amount of crony capitalism between governments and businesses. And I saw in important respects the ways in which the United States had evolved over time as a model for many aspects of Latin American development. It gives me no joy to report today that no small part of the convergence, if it has occurred, has been in the other direction. That the United States has, in important respects, moved towards more closed, economic nationalist, even protectionist policy approaches, that our democracy is less inclusive and more fragile than it felt a quarter century ago, and that issues of the rule of law loom larger today than they did at that time. And so there is, I think, more in common for us to think about in the Americas than perhaps I felt during the 1990s. The last observation that I would make is that the authors of the report, and it is, I think, admirable, emphasize what Latin America can, should, and even must do for itself if it is to promote prosperity and to meet the aspiration of its peoples. I was sorry that there is not more discussion of the role of the international community. The United States has had a long history of initiatives towards Latin America, emphasizing the flow of capital, emphasizing freer trade, emphasizing the exchange of ideas. And I think it is unfortunate that Latin America has not been more prominent on the U.S. policy agenda during the 21st century. Part of that, to be fair, is a reflection of the fact that Latin America has not had wars and has not had financial catastrophes and has not had famines. And there is a tendency for the urgent to crowd out the profoundly important. But I think a nation that aspires to leadership in the way that the United States does has erred substantially in the 21st century in not paying more attention to maintaining close relationships, to seeking advice on matters geopolitical, to promoting common prosperity, to encouraging the exchange of peoples with Latin America than we have. And I think in a world of superpower competition, whereas we have pulled back, others have stepped forward, history may remember that as a serious error. And so as I think about aspirations for Latin America in the future, I hope that on the agenda of secretaries of state, secretaries of the Treasury, national security advisors, secretaries of commerce, and presidents of the United States, that the common challenges of the Americas and the common opportunities in the Americas will be larger going forward and play a more prominent role on the agenda. Thank you very much. Back to you, Melissa.